Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, good night, and good whatever time of day you are in when you're listening and seeing this. I hope you're doing all right. I'm having to record these lessons ahead of time, ahead of schedule, so I'm not able to provide accurate commentary on how we're doing in right now, but I hope we're doing well at the moment. This is the main lecture for week 6, interrupting. Don't forget, you can always check in the course book, the PDF on eClass. It's there for your perusal. If you want to read along there, find interrupting. You'll find it there. Usually when we think of interrupting someone or something, we think it as quite, especially in conversation, as a rude thing to do. But interrupting is not in of itself a rude thing. It's a means of showing interest, of being an active listener. And so it's a way of building connections with the other speaker, and also it's a very natural thing to do. So an interruption, the main idea is that an interruption is not in and of itself a rude or something, a thing to avoid. So this week we're going to go over when we might interrupt someone, when we should interrupt someone, and how we can do that. And we've got some examples of active listening, and I think it might be quite good for us to give it a listen. All right, let's get started. So the most important thing we need to remember when we're interrupting conversation, interrupting another person in English, is that you want to interrupt the person in order to create a connection with that person you're talking to. It's not rude if you're creating that connection, but if you're interrupting in order to change the topic or to disagree and to end the conversation, then that's rude. Also, you shouldn't disagree before they finish explaining their idea. That is rude, but that is common, but it is rude. So let's go over some ideas. And if we interrupt politely and with the purpose of connecting with the other person by sharing your own interests and your own ideas, your own experiences, interrupting can actually show that you're actively participating in the conversation. And it makes the conversation even better. That's good. That's a good thing. So here are some good reasons that you would interrupt the conversation. So the first one, you could interrupt to ask for clarification, for more detail, to get them to talk a bit more. The second is to agree with the other person. That can happen. You can also interrupt to show interest and enthusiasm. And number 4, you can interrupt to mention that that they've reminded you of something similar that you're going to talk about later. So even though there's good reasons to interrupt someone, we need to make sure we interrupt politely. We need to make sure of that. So our first reason, when we're asking for clarification, if we want someone talking and we wanted them to give a longer explanation, provide more detail, then it's perfectly fine to ask for clarification. This can actually be very helpful if you want to keep them talking on topic. You don't want the speaker to wander away talking about other things. If you want to focus their conversation, if you're interviewing someone, for example, you want them to focus on the question and answer about that, then asking these clarifying questions can be quite helpful. It also helps show that you're listening to the person, listening to the speaker. So here's some useful phrases that might help us when we want to interrupt for clarification. Sorry, but could you go over that again? Sorry, but would you mind repeating that? Excuse me for interrupting, but I'm not sure I follow. Could you repeat that? Sorry for interrupting. I'm not sure what you mean. What was that again? And then, what's sometimes called mirroring or reflexive listening, repeating an item from their conversation. And I have an example for us. So let's try, this is a podcast, and I have it queued up. This is a comedy podcast, but they do talk about reflexive listening, the active listening, and basically letting the other person talk more and more and give more detail with very little involvement on your end. This is very popular. This reflexive listening is very popular and very useful by negotiators, especially with hostage negotiations, where you want the person to keep talking in order to make more time, to keep them calm, and that is quite helpful. All right, let's give a listen. All right, now that was them introducing the topic of the reflexive listening, of the mirroring. That's what they're talking about now. This is just a podcast. It's fine, but this is where it will get interesting. These are two real people. This is an unscripted podcast, so this was not planned. They've talked about this conversation technique, and one of them is going to use it in a few minutes in the podcast. So we'll skip to that section now.
Really want to go to bed.
Your
I'm like,
periphery.
what if I took a nap? Where
On off 6 hours. Once you go under 6, you're starting to hit woo territory. But
that's where I'm at currently. Right at this moment, I'm in the woo territory where I'm having this conversation with you, but I want to let you know my periphery is a little fuzzy, and I just really want to go to bed.
Your
I'm like,
periphery.
what if I took a nap?
He just said it. Your periphery. So he's trying to use the same technique they just talked about just a few minutes before, but we'll see how it works on the redhead guy.
Nap.
your periphery?
Yeah, the sides of my vision are not focused. I'm in that state of awake where it's like, boy, I can function and I can do stuff and I can talk to you, but everything about my eyes is like, what if we closed? What if we just closed for a little bit? And then, what if we laid down though? That's where I'm at right now. I'm fine. Everything about me is working great, but my eyes are like, hey, what if we just took a nap? So that's my problem.
It sounds like you're sleep deprived.
I feel sleep deprived. Yes, you're absolutely right.
What if?
But it's weird because I'm not. It feels like I'm sleeping too much.
Sleeping too much?
Yes. I maybe it's because my days are now segmented into different portions. I'll go to bed at a normal time and then sleep a little bit during the day, and it could be just because I'm mentally exhausted with staying inside all the time and constantly wiping down stuff. Here's a great example. If I go to the grocery store, right, and I need to get, I don't know, a carton of milk, right? The other day I went and got my parents' milk and ground beef, right? So
Right.
The process is literally all right, so I need to go get my gloves and my mask. All right, I'm going to go to the grocery store. I touched a bunch of stuff on the way down to my car. So before I touch my car, I'm going to sanitize my hands. All right, I got in the car. Now I'm going to put on my mask and my gloves as I go to the grocery store. Get to the grocery store. I go outside, I open the door. I'm outside. I have my gloves on and my mask. Go get the groceries. And I get back to my car. And then before I open my car, I do the glove maneuver, where you use one glove to get the other glove off, that kind of thing. And then I have a separate bag for those gloves that I then put them into and then, tie it up. And then I take my mask off so I don't touch the mask with my gloves. And then I sanitize my hands. And then I get in the car. And then I drive my ass back home, get out, grab all the groceries, go up to my apartment, re-sanitize, mess with the groceries. Then if it's a plastic thing, wipe it down with a sanitizing wipe, and even the bags itself. So now I'm done messing with the bags. So then I wash my hand. Literally all that stuff is so exhausting that it's just I feel
Sounds
like I'm
exhausting.
overwhelmed with the nonsense of just the times we live in, and it's just exhausting. And maybe that's it as well, where I'm just I hate this. I hate it. I, too, want to not do this anymore, but I'm going to keep doing it because it's the right thing to do, but it sucks.
I don't know if you realize, but my last 5 responses to you were FBI negotiation responses.
I didn't realize that. I was in my own world. That's the thing is you could have got me to give you a bunch of money.
That's what I realized, because yesterday I was telling Toaster Woman, I was like, yeah, this FBI negotiation thing, it's cool. It does this thing.
So there you go. There's an example of how the reflexive listening, in that just repeating certain phrases, certain words from the person, you're interrupting them, but you're allowing them to talk more and more. This is a helpful way to get people to talk more, especially if you just want them to talk. All right, let's get back into it. Another reason that we might interrupt someone is to agree with them. If they're talking about something that's important, it's a nice way to talk about and keep them talking, to show that you share their interest. And this encourages them to keep talking about this specific topic, whether it be sports or TV show, podcast, anything really. So some examples, obviously the content words of like book and the individual things. So like, I love that book. And that last episode of Game of Thrones was so crazy. I love kayaking in the summer. I also thought his latest book was disappointing. I know. I didn't understand what happened in the last show either. So these are just nice ways to interrupt, to agree with the person. I know, right? Isn't that wacky? So it's a way of being an active listener to keep them talking about that topic. So, if they're talking about a personal experience or emotion or feelings, then you use different phrases, and those phrases could include, "I can totally relate. I've been there. I know exactly how you feel. That's happened to me. I know what you mean. That's so frustrating." Or, "I know what you mean. That's so challenging." Or, "I know what you mean. That's so nerve-wracking." So these phrases are there to just show that you empathize with the other person. I like to say "I've been there," or just shortened to "been there," about usually certain experiences, things like that. So, falling asleep on the subway, things like that. Been there. Fell asleep on line number 2, rode around for one whole circuit. That was a long time. So, when you have the similar opinion with the other person, this is sharing something that you have in common, so you can talk about it in more detail, which is quite helpful and quite nice. These interruptions help create connections with the other person, connections during the conversation. And this was mentioned in the example video, in that they gave the anecdote of the FBI guy negotiator went to a yoga camp and said very little about himself and let other people talk. And those other people built connections by just talking to him. But he didn't share information. This is manipulation. And so it's not a very nice thing to do, but it can be quite helpful if you don't know anyone, or you just don't feel like talking and you want other people to just talk. That happens sometimes. Something that's important, that if you disagree with someone, that's fine. You can disagree, of course. It's perfectly acceptable to disagree with people about most things. But it's much more polite to wait until they finish their thought before you start sharing your opposing idea. Another reason that we might interrupt to show interest is to show interest and enthusiasm. So that you want to keep them going, to show that you're really interested in trees. This is something we do as an audience. When we're in an audience of a show, we do a lot. We go, "Woo, yeah, oh yeah." Well, we do that. So, when we're in a smaller conversation, then we'll need to use different phrases. And so here's the enthusiastic phrases we can say. Like, for example, "I'm curious how you handled that. I've wanted to know how that works. I've been wondering how that is. I'm interested in hearing more." And you can see the others on the screen. These are just phrases to help us show interest, to show enthusiasm. Of course, with enthusiasm, then you have to have an enthusiastic, high-energy tone. You can't just say, "I've been wanting to see that." That sounds like sarcasm, and that's the opposite meaning, that you actually don't want to. So you need to have, "I've been wanting to see that." You have to have the rising intonation, the peppiness, the energy. You need that. So these small interjections, these brief interruptions, can help move the conversation forward because the speaker knows that you're interested. This is all ways of keeping the other person talking more and more about that. Sometimes you want to interrupt to mention that you want to talk about something later, which, if they're a polite person, they'll let you talk and they'll bring the conversation back to you about your point. That's how it should work. But not everyone is a polite speaker. So if you want to share something similar, it's great to interrupt them that you want to talk about it, but it's something that you'll need to wait until after they finish their thought before you tell your story. So here's some interruptions about that. That reminds me. Oh, I've always wanted to talk about. Let's come back to that. As you were saying, remind me to tell you about my experience doing. And this way, you can go back to listening carefully to the other person and not worry about your own exciting anecdote. Something that's important when we interrupt someone, this is where we get into the rudeness of interruptions. When you have your own long story, well, they're telling a story and you just come in with your story, well, then they are going to naturally feel resentful of that. That's not polite. So let's think about how we can be polite interrupters versus impolite interrupters. But it's important for us to think about how we can be active listeners. This is very helpful for us. Being an active listener. Here are some more expressions, especially if you want to be more polite about things. Sorry, but I just wanted to say, excuse me for interrupting, but can I add something? Can I just say something? Can I ask you a question? Before you continue, I'd just like to add. So these are some other phrases that we can use to interrupt politely. Of course, with tone and our expression and our body language, that can be polite or it can be impolite. So we need to be aware of those. And we'll talk about those other parts, tone, body language, in the coming weeks. But that will come in later. But all of these phrases show that you respect the other person's ideas. And you want to make sure that's okay to interrupt, to use that. Also, you can raise your hand, raise your finger. It doesn't need to be a big enthusiastic hand raise like in class, but you can politely raise your hand to give a visual cue that you want to say something. And most speakers will let you talk. Two things that can help us minimize the idea that we're being rude. One, we can lead our interruption with a question or introductory phrase. It shows that you care about what they. That shows the listener that you care about what they have to say, and you can apologize to the interruption. You don't have to. It depends on your own feeling. By national stereotype, Canadians apologize quite a lot. They say, I'm sorry. That doesn't mean they're actually sorry. It's part of their national habit. It's their habit to say such things. Americans habitually don't say I'm sorry too often. They do say it, but Canadians are famous for being overly polite in Canada. Something to remember, that interrupting respectfully and thoughtfully with good intentions helps lead to a better conversation. Remember, it's a conversation, not a sermon, not a lecture. Conversations are two-way, are multi-way. Sermons and lectures are one-way, and that's something that we want to avoid in our conversations. This is the end of the main lecture. I hope you've had a good time. I hope you have a safe week. Please make sure to check eClass for the supplementary material, which there will be. There'll be further examples for us to see. And don't forget to check the discussion board for class notes and a question and updates about the class. Thank you. Have an excellent week, and goodbye.